There's a principle in quantum physics called the observer effect, where the mere act of observation changes what's being observed. The scientist who watches the particle determines its behavior. Now stay with me. Your subconscious mind operates on this exact principle. The chaos in your life, the storms, the circumstances that feel so solid and immovable, they're not fixed realities. They're possibilities, waiting for an authority to collapse them into a new form. And that authority? It's been inside you all along, dormant, unused, like a king who forgot he was royalty. Today, you remember. You're here because something brought you to this moment. Maybe you typed a question into the search bar at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep. Maybe you've been scrolling for hours trying to find something, anything, that would give you relief from the pressure building in your chest. Maybe you're sitting at your kitchen table right now, coffee getting cold, looking at bills you don't know how to pay, or reading text messages from someone who used to love you, or staring at test results that don't make sense. Whatever storm is raging in your life right now, and I know there's at least one, probably more, I want you to know something before we go any further. That storm is not your master. It never was. You've just been speaking to it in the wrong language. Let me tell you why you're really watching this video. It's not just for information. You've had plenty of information. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, maybe even been to therapy or spiritual counseling. You've tried affirmations. You've tried positive thinking. You've tried letting go and surrendering and trusting the process. And some of it helped. Maybe. For a little while. But the storm keeps coming back, doesn't it? The anxiety finds you in the quiet moments. The financial pressure doesn't ease. The relationship doesn't heal. The body doesn't respond. And you start to wonder if maybe you're doing something wrong, if maybe you don't have enough faith, if maybe you're just one of those people who's meant to struggle. Let me stop you right there. That's not true. That's never been true. The problem isn't your faith. The problem isn't you. The problem is that you've been taught only half of the spiritual equation. You've been taught surrender, but not authority. You've been taught to accept, but not to command. You've been taught to flow with life, but not to direct it. And that incomplete teaching has left you passive in the face of circumstances that were always meant to bow to you, not the other way around. So here's what we're going to do together in this time we have. I'm going to teach you something that sounds almost blasphemous when you first hear it. Something that goes against everything the world has told you about humility and acceptance and going with the flow. I'm going to teach you how to speak to your storm. Not pray about it. Not wish it away. Not visualize it dissolving. I'm going to teach you how to look at the chaos in your life and speak to it with the same authority that a parent speaks to a child having a tantrum, with the same certainty that a captain speaks to a crew, with the same power that causes the storm to pause and listen, and then obey. And before you think this is just more metaphysical fantasy, more spiritual bypassing, more toxic positivity dressed up in religious language, let me be very clear. This is law. This is how consciousness works. This is how your subconscious mind has always worked. You've been using this law your entire life. You've just been using it unconsciously, usually against yourself, usually to create more of what you don't want. Today, you learn to use it deliberately, consciously, with the full force of your divine authority. Because here's what almost no one tells you. You were designed to be a cooperative force with the infinite intelligence that runs this universe. You were designed to be a channel through which creative power flows. You were never meant to be a victim waiting for rescue. You were never meant to beg life to be merciful. You were meant to recognize that the same power that holds galaxies in place, that causes flowers to bloom, that heals cuts without you thinking about it, that power lives in you. And when you speak from alignment with that power, when you speak not from your small ego self but from that deeper place of knowing, reality rearranges itself. Not because you're manipulating the universe, not because you're forcing anything, but because you're finally cooperating with the way things actually work. So, if you're ready to stop being powerless, if you're ready to stop negotiating with your problems, if you're ready to remember something about yourself that you forgot a long time ago, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you has the capacity to change everything. Not tomorrow, not someday, today, right now, in this very moment, as you listen to these words, something inside you can shift, something can click, and when it does, you look back at this moment as the moment everything changed. Let me tell you a story. It's not a story about me, and it's not a story about any specific person who came to me for help. It's a parable, an illustration, but it contains more truth than most factual accounts ever could. I want you to really see this story in your mind, really feel it, because somewhere in this story is a mirror of your own life. There was once a captain of a great ship, a man who had spent decades at sea, who knew the winds and the waves, who could read the sky like a book and navigate through storms that would terrify lesser sailors. This captain had crossed every ocean, commanded the respect of every crew he led, and never once doubted his authority on the water. When he spoke, men listened. When he gave a command, it was executed without question, not because he was cruel or tyrannical, but because he carried a certainty that came from deep experience, from knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. But then one day, disaster struck. A storm bigger than any he had ever seen rose up without warning. A wall of water and wind that tore his ship apart like it was made of paper. He was thrown into the ocean, smashed against debris, pulled under by currents that had no mercy, and somehow, by some miracle or accident, he washed up on a small island, more dead than alive. When he woke up, he couldn't remember his name, couldn't remember his ship, his crew, his years at sea. The trauma of the wreck had wiped his memory clean, left him with only fragments, only shadows. The islanders found him, took him in, nursed him back to health, and because he couldn't remember who he was, he assumed he was one of them. Just another person trying to survive on this small piece of land surrounded by an ocean that sometimes fed them, and sometimes tried to kill them. For years he lived this way. He worked in the gardens, mended fishing nets, hid in the caves when storms approached. He was afraid of the ocean now, this man who had once commanded ships across it. He would stand at the shore sometimes and feel something pulling at him, some vague sense that he was meant to be out there, not here, but he had no context for that feeling. So he ignored it, pushed it down, told himself he was being foolish. Then one day, after years of this quiet life, the biggest storm anyone had ever seen appeared on the horizon. The islanders panicked immediately. They'd seen storms before, but this one was different. The sky turned black in the middle of the day. The wind began to howl like something alive and angry. The ocean started to rise, waves building higher and higher, and everyone knew that this time the island might not survive. This time they might all be swept into the sea. The islanders ran inland, gathered the children, secured what they could, prepared to hide and hope and pray that they would see another morning. But the captain, though he didn't know he was a captain, didn't know he had any right to that title, something in him couldn't run. Something in him refused to hide. He stood there at the edge of the village, looking at the approaching storm, and something started to happen in his mind. Fragments. Just fragments at first. A feeling of standing on a deck. A feeling of wind on his face, but not fearful wind, just wind that he understood. A feeling of men waiting for his word. Waiting for him to tell them what to do. And then more fragments, coming faster now. The memory of his voice, cutting through chaos. The memory of giving commands that were instantly obeyed. Not because people feared him, but because they trusted him. Because his certainty gave them certainty. And standing there with the storm bearing down, with the rain starting to fall in sheets and the wind trying to knock him off his feet, he felt something wake up inside him. Not a memory, exactly. Not yet, but a knowing. A deep, cellular recognition that he was not supposed to be afraid of this storm. That somehow, in some way he didn't fully understand, he outranked it. He walked to the shore. The islanders shouted at him to come back, to take cover, that he was going to die. But he couldn't stop walking. It was like his feet remembered something his mind didn't. And when he got to the water's edge, when he stood there with the waves crashing around his ankles and the storm towering above him like a wall of destruction, he opened his mouth and spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He didn't pray for intervention. He just spoke, with a voice that came from somewhere deeper than his throat, deeper than his conscious mind. One word. Just one word. But spoken with an authority that he didn't know he possessed. Spoken with a certainty that came from a place inside him that the amnesia couldn't touch. Enough, he said. That's all. Just enough. Spoken like a father speaks to a child who's gone too far. Spoken like a leader speaks to chaos that needs to be organized. Spoken like someone who knows, beyond any doubt, that he will be obeyed. And here's what happened. Here's what the islanders, cowering in their homes and caves, witnessed through cracks in the walls and from behind rocks. The storm paused. I don't mean it gradually lessened. I don't mean the wind slowly died down. I mean it paused, like something alive that had just heard a voice it recognized as being above it in the hierarchy of reality. The rain stopped mid-fall. The wind held its breath. The waves that were about to crash over the island hung suspended for a moment that felt like eternity. And then the storm changed course. Just turned, like a ship answering a rudder, and moved away from the island. Within minutes, the sky began to clear. Within an hour, the sun was shining, and the ocean was calm, and the only evidence that anything had happened was the wet ground and the bewildered faces of people who didn't understand what they'd just seen. The captain didn't get his full memory back that day. It would come back in pieces over the following weeks, his name, his ship, his years of experience. But he got something back that was more important than memory. He got back the knowing of who he was. Not his identity, not his story, not his past, but his essential nature, the part of him that was born with authority, that was designed to speak and be obeyed, that was never meant to cower before circumstances. Now, I tell you this story not because I'm asking you to believe that it happened exactly this way. I tell you this story because you are that captain. You are the one who forgot who you were. You are the one who's been living like an islander, running and hiding from storms, when you were meant to stand at the shore and speak to them. Somewhere along the way, you experienced a shipwreck. Maybe it was childhood trauma. Maybe it was a devastating loss. Maybe it was years of being told you were powerless. Years of circumstances that seemed to prove you had no control. Years of prayers that seemed to go unanswered. And slowly, gradually, you forgot. You forgot that you carry inside you the same creative intelligence that formed this universe. You forgot that your subconscious mind is directly connected to infinite power. You forgot that when you speak from alignment with that power, when you speak not from fear but from faith, not from ego but from spirit, reality has to respond. You've been living like an islander, afraid of the storms, running from them, begging them to spare you, negotiating with your problems, asking your circumstances for permission to be happy. And all this time, all these years, there's been something inside you trying to wake up, trying to remind you that you're not supposed to be afraid, that you're not supposed to be powerless, that there's a way of speaking that storms recognize as authority. Today is the day you remember. Today is the day the fragments start coming back. Today is the day you walk to the shore. But before we go further, I need to explain something to you, something that most spiritual teachers skip over because it sounds too complicated, or too scientific, or too far removed from practical help. But it's not complicated. It's actually beautifully simple. And understanding this will change how you see everything. Your subconscious mind is not separate from the universe. It's not contained in your skull. It's not isolated in your personal consciousness. Your subconscious mind is like a drop of water in an infinite ocean. It's made of the same substance as the whole ocean. It has access to the same information as the whole ocean, and when it moves, the whole ocean responds. Scientists are starting to understand this now. They're seeing that consciousness doesn't emerge from matter, but that matter emerges from consciousness. That observation affects reality at the quantum level. That the universe is not a dead machine we're trapped in, but a living, responsive, intelligent field that we're part of. This is not mysticism. This is not wishful thinking. This is the cutting edge of physics, of neuroscience, of our understanding of how reality actually works. And here's what it means for you, practically, in your life right now with your real problems and your real storms. It means that when you change your consciousness, you change your reality. Not eventually, not as a side effect, directly, immediately. The same way that when you decide to raise your arm raises. There's no gap, no delay, no question of whether it will work. You intend it, and it happens. Because your consciousness and your body are not separate systems. They're one system. Your consciousness and your external reality work the same way. They're not separate. The circumstances you're experiencing right now, your financial situation, your relationships, your health, your opportunities, they're not things happening to you from outside. They're things happening through you from inside. They're the physical manifestation of your dominant mental states, your habitual thought patterns, your deep beliefs about yourself and life. This is why fighting your circumstances doesn't work. This is why pushing against your problems exhausts you. Because you're fighting yourself. You're pushing against your own consciousness made visible. So when I tell you that you can speak to the storm, and it will calm, I'm not asking you to believe in magic. I'm not asking you to have blind faith. I'm asking you to understand law. Spiritual law, yes, but law nonetheless. As reliable as gravity, as consistent as mathematics. When you speak from a certain level of consciousness, a level I'm going to teach you how to access your subconscious mind, which is connected to the infinite intelligence that creates and sustains all things, begins to rearrange reality to match your words. Not because reality is malleable and meaningless, but because your words, spoken from the right place, are creative. They're not descriptions of what is. They're instructions for what will be. Jesus understood this better than almost anyone who's ever lived. Look at how he dealt with storms. Look at how he dealt with sickness. Look at how he dealt with death itself. He didn't pray for God to fix things. He didn't hope that maybe, if he was lucky, circumstances would improve. He spoke directly to the problem. Peace, be still, he said to the storm. Not, dear God, please calm this storm. Not, I hope this storm will pass. But a direct command, spoken to the storm itself, as if the storm were a subordinate that had forgotten its place, and the storm obeyed. Immediately, not gradually, not eventually, the water became calm, the wind stopped, and the disciples were terrified because they suddenly realized they were in the presence of someone who understood something they didn't. Someone who knew how to use a power they didn't know existed. But here's what's radical. Here's what the religious institutions don't want you to fully understand. Jesus said you could do the same things he did. He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. He said if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He wasn't exaggerating. He was telling you the literal truth about how consciousness works, about how much power you actually have, about what you're capable of when you remember who you are. You have the same subconscious mind he had. You have the same connection to infinite intelligence. You have the same creative power. The only difference is that he believed it and you don't. Yet. But you're starting to. I can feel it happening in you even now. Even as you listen to these words, something's waking up. Something's remembering. Now let me tell you another story, a different kind of story, because I want you to understand this from multiple angles. I want this to sink in so deep that you can never forget it again. Imagine a parent in a grocery store with a 2-year-old child. The child wants candy. The parent says no. And the child, being 2 years old, being not yet fully socialized, being still operating mostly on pure impulse and emotion, has a complete meltdown, screaming at the top of their lungs, throwing themselves on the floor, knocking items off shelves, making a scene that has every other shopper staring and judging and wondering why this parent can't control their child. Now imagine 2 different parents responding to this identical situation. The first parent panics. The storm of their child's tantrum triggers their own storm of fear and shame and desperation. They start begging. Please stop, please. Everyone's looking at us. I'll give you anything. Just please calm down. Please be good. I'll buy you the candy. I'll buy you 2 candies. Just please stop. They negotiate with the tantrum. They give it power by treating it as an equal force. Something they have to appease. Something they have to surrender to. What happens? The child learns that tantrums work. The child learns that if they scream loud enough long enough, they can override any boundary, get anything they want. The parent has taught them, accidentally, that chaos is more powerful than authority. Now imagine the second parent. Same child, same tantrum, same public setting. But this parent doesn't panic. They don't ignore the child. This isn't about being cold or unfeeling, but they also don't negotiate. They simply kneel down to the child's level, make eye contact, and speak with quiet, unshakable authority. That's enough, they say. Not yelling, not angry, just certain, just clear. We don't do this. I know you're upset. I know you want the candy, but the answer is no. And this behavior is not acceptable. We're going to take 3 deep breaths together, and then we're going to finish shopping. And here's what happens. The child hears something in that voice that pierces through the tantrum. Not fear, not anger, not negotiation. Authority. Calm, loving, unshakable authority. The voice of someone who knows their role, who isn't threatened by chaos, who isn't trying to control the child, but also isn't controlled by the child. The tantrum doesn't always stop immediately. Sometimes it takes a moment. Sometimes the child tests the boundary one more time. But it stops. It always stops. Because children, for all their emotional intensity, actually crave authority. They crave boundaries. They crave the security of knowing that there's someone stronger than their emotions, someone who won't be moved by their storm. Your subconscious mind is exactly like that child. And the storms in your life, your anxiety, your financial pressure, your relationship problems, your health issues, they're exactly like that tantrum. They're not actually powerful. They're just loud. They're just intense. And they will continue, they will escalate, they will dominate your life until they encounter something that speaks with authority. But here's what almost no one tells you. Here's what you've never been taught. You've been trained your entire life to be the first parent. You've been taught to panic when the storm rises. You've been taught to beg your problems to leave. You've been taught to negotiate with your fear, to bargain with your circumstances, to give your anxiety the dignity of being treated as something you have to appease. Please don't let me lose my job. Please don't let them leave me. Please don't let this be cancer. Please, please, please let this work out. And listen, I'm not mocking prayer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with asking for help. But I am saying that begging is not the highest form of prayer. Desperate pleading is not the most powerful way to access divine intelligence. Because when you beg, you're operating from the consciousness of the first parent. You're giving the problem power. You're confirming, with every desperate word, that you believe the storm is stronger than you are. What if instead, and this is going to feel uncomfortable at first, it's going to feel almost wrong, what if instead you became the second parent? What if you looked at your storm, your anxiety, your impossible circumstance, and you spoke to it the way that second parents spoke to their child? Not with anger, not with force, not trying to make something happen through sheer willpower, but with calm, quiet, unshakable certainty. That's enough. This anxiety is not welcome in my mind. I release it now. This financial pressure is dissolving. Money flows to me easily and naturally. This sickness is leaving my body. Every cell is returning to perfect health. Not asking, not hoping, not wishing, declaring, informing reality of what's happening, not negotiating whether it might happen. Can you feel the difference? Can you feel how different that energy is from begging? It's not arrogant. It's not ego. True authority is never arrogant. Arrogance is actually a sign of insecurity, of someone trying to convince themselves they have power they're not sure they possess. Real authority doesn't need to convince anyone. It just knows. And that knowing, that certainty, that's what your subconscious mind responds to, not your words. Your words are just sounds, just vibrations in the air. What your subconscious responds to is the consciousness behind the words, the feeling state underneath the language, the degree of certainty or uncertainty you're broadcasting with every syllable. This is why affirmations don't work for most people. They stand in front of the mirror saying, I am confident, I am successful, I am loved, and nothing changes. And they conclude that this whole consciousness thing is nonsense, that positive thinking is just feel-good delusion. But the problem wasn't the method. The problem was that they were saying one thing with their mouth, while feeling something completely different in their heart. Imagine a general trying to command his army while visibly trembling, while tears run down his face, while his voice shakes with fear. The words might be commanding, "We attack at dawn, we will be victorious." But what are the soldiers responding to? Not the words. The presence. The energy. The consciousness. And if that consciousness is broadcasting fear and doubt, if the body language is screaming, "I don't believe this will work," then no amount of commanding words will create commanding results. This is exactly what happens when you try to affirm something you don't believe. Your mouth says, "I am financially abundant," but your heart is racing with anxiety about the bills. Your lips say, "I am healed," but your mind is rehearsing the diagnosis, imagining the worst outcomes. Your voice declares, "I am loved," but your emotional body is collapsed in the pain of rejection. And your subconscious mind, which is not fooled by words, which responds only to the authentic frequency you're broadcasting, receives a very different instruction than what you consciously intended. It hears not your affirmation, but your anxiety, not your declaration, but your doubt, and it creates accordingly. So before you speak to your storm, before you try to command anything, you have to first shift your consciousness. You have to access that place inside you that already knows you have authority. And here's the beautiful secret. Here's what makes this possible. Even if you don't feel powerful right now, even if you're reading this from a place of desperation, that place exists in you. It's always been there. You just forgot how to access it. Think about a moment in your life when you felt absolutely certain about something. Maybe it was something small. Maybe you were driving and you knew, without even thinking about it, that you needed to brake because someone was about to cut you off. And you braked. And sure enough, someone cut you off. And you weren't even surprised, because some part of you knew it was coming. That's your subconscious mind feeding you information, operating beyond your conscious awareness, accessing intelligence that your rational mind can't see. Or maybe you were thinking about a friend you hadn't heard from in months, and within hours they called you. Or you walked into a room and knew, just knew, that you were in danger, that you needed to leave, even though everything looked fine. Or you met someone, and immediately trusted them, or immediately didn't trust them, for reasons you couldn't articulate. That's the deeper intelligence I'm talking about. That's your connection to something bigger than your personal consciousness. And when you learn to speak from that place, when you learn to access that level of knowing, and then broadcast it through your words, everything changes. Here's how you begin to access it. Close your eyes for a moment. If you're driving or doing something where you need to see, don't close your eyes, but you can do this with your eyes open too. Take a deep breath. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Not answer it, just ask it, and let the answer come without forcing it. The question is this: what would it feel like if I already had the power to resolve my biggest problem? Not what would it feel like if the problem was solved. That's outcome focused. That puts the emphasis on the circumstances changing. I'm asking something different. What would it feel like if you, right now as you are, had the power to solve it? The authority. The capability. Not someday. Not if you were different. Now. Just sit with that question. Let it work on you. And notice if there's a shift, even a tiny one, even just a flicker, in how you feel. Notice if there's a part of you, maybe buried deep, maybe barely audible, that says, "I do have that power." Or maybe it doesn't use words. Maybe it's just a subtle sense of expansion, of possibility, of something relaxing in your chest or your shoulders. That feeling, even if it's faint, is your access point. That's the doorway into the consciousness of authority. And every time you practice feeling it, even for a moment, even if doubt rushes in immediately after, you're strengthening that pathway. You're training your system to recognize that feeling, to access it more easily, to sustain it for longer periods. Because here's what you need to understand. Faith is not a belief. Faith is a feeling. It's not thinking that something might happen, or hoping it will happen, or even believing it will happen. Faith is feeling the way you would feel if it had already happened. It's not future tense. It's not, I will be healed. It's present tense. I am healed. But more than that, it's present feeling. The feeling of health in your body right now. Even if symptoms are still present, the feeling of abundance in your heart right now, even if your bank account says otherwise. The feeling of peace in your mind right now, even if circumstances are still chaotic. And when you can access that feeling, even for a moment, and then speak from that place, your words become creative. They become commands. Not because you're forcing the universe to bend, but because you're aligning with the way the universe already works. Let me be very specific about how to do this, because I don't want this to stay abstract. I want you to be able to use this today, this hour, for the real storm you're facing right now. Step 1. Get clear about what storm you're addressing. You can't command what you can't name. Don't be vague. Don't say my life is a mess, or everything is falling apart. Get specific. Name it simply, clearly, without drama. I have $3,000 in credit card debt and I'm afraid I can't pay it. My partner and I haven't had a real conversation in 2 weeks, and I'm afraid we're drifting apart. I have chronic pain in my lower back and I'm afraid it will never heal. Name it. Look at it. Don't hide from it. Step 2. Acknowledge the fear without becoming it. This is important. You're afraid. That's okay. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is just information, just your nervous system, trying to protect you. So acknowledge it. Yes, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what happens if I can't pay these bills. I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being in pain forever. Don't spiritually bypass this. Don't try to jump immediately to positive thinking. Just be honest about the fear. Step 3. Remember who you really are. Not your story. Not your circumstances. Not your past or your diagnosis or your bank account. But your essential nature. You are consciousness having a temporary human experience. You are an individualized expression of infinite intelligence. The same power that created you is still creating through you in every moment. You're not separate from it. You're not disconnected from it. You're a point of focus for it, a channel through which it flows. Step 4. Access the feeling of authority. Ask yourself that question again. What would it feel like if I already had the power to resolve this? And wait for the answer. Wait for that subtle shift. It might be very quiet at first. It might be barely perceptible. But it's there. It's always there. And the more you practice accessing it, the stronger it becomes. Step 5. Speak from that place. Not from your fear. Not from your desperation. From that place of quiet knowing. And you're going to speak directly to the storm, not about it. Not God, please fix this. Not universe, I hope this works out. But to the situation itself, to the anxiety, to the debt, to the pain, to the relationship, as if it were something that's been listening this whole time, waiting for you to remember. You have authority over it. And here's what you say. Use your own words, but this is the template, this is the frequency. This is no longer welcome in my reality. I release it now. I choose differently. I claim peace. I claim health. I claim abundance. I claim love. And so it is. Say it once. Say it with as much certainty as you can access in this moment, even if that certainty is only 5%, even if doubt is trying to shout over it. Say it anyway. And then, and this is the hardest part, turn away from the storm. Mentally, emotionally, turn away. Stop watching the storm. Stop checking if it's getting smaller. Stop monitoring your anxiety to see if it's lessening. Stop looking at your bank account every hour to see if money appeared. Stop obsessing over the relationship or the diagnosis or the circumstance. Turn away. This is the real test of authority. Kings don't give commands and then nervously watch to see if they're obeyed. They give the command and move on, knowing it will be done. They don't doubt. They don't second guess. They don't hover anxiously, checking and rechecking. They command, and then they shift their attention to something else. trusting that the machinery of reality is already responding to their word. And this is where most people fail. Not in the speaking, but in the turning away. They speak with authority for 30 seconds, and then spend the next 23 hours and 59.5 minutes worrying, doubting, checking, rehearsing all the reasons it won't work. And that worry, that doubt, that anxious monitoring, that's also a command that says, I don't believe what I just declared, I don't trust this process. The storm is still my master. And your subconscious mind, which is always listening, which never stops listening, receives that secondary command as the more authentic one, because you broadcast it for so much longer, because you feel it so much more intensely, and it creates accordingly. So you have to practice turning away. You have to practice what it means to live from the end, to live as if the storm has already calmed, even while it's still apparently raging, to live as if you're already healthy, already abundant, already loved, already free, not fake it, not pretend, but to access the feeling of that reality, and let that feeling guide your thoughts, your choices, your energy, your attention. This doesn't mean you don't take practical action. If you have debt, you still create a budget. If you have health issues, you still see doctors. If your relationship is struggling, you still have conversations. But you do these things from a different consciousness, not from desperation and fear, from calm authority, from the knowing that you're working with divine intelligence, not against impossible odds. Let me tell you what happens when you do this. Not always, but often, and more often the more you practice, you'll notice something remarkable. You'll speak to your storm with authority, and then you'll turn away, and then you'll go about your day. And at some point, maybe hours later, maybe days later, you'll suddenly realize you haven't thought about the problem in a while. You haven't checked. You haven't worried. And when you do finally think about it again, something has shifted. Maybe not completely, maybe not miraculously, but shifted. The anxiety is less intense. A solution you hadn't seen before becomes obvious. Someone reaches out with unexpected help. The test results come back better than expected. The money shows up from an unanticipated source. The conversation you were dreading goes better than you imagined. And you'll realize the storm started to calm the moment you stopped treating it as your master and started speaking to it as your subordinate. But even if nothing visible changes immediately, even if the circumstances still look exactly the same, something has changed in you, and that's actually more important. Because what's changed is your relationship to the storm. You're no longer its victim. You are no longer helpless before it. You've remembered, even if only for a moment, that you have authority. And once you remember that, once you feel that, even briefly, you can never fully forget it again. Now I want to talk about why this sometimes doesn't work. Why sometimes you speak to the storm and nothing happens. Why sometimes you declare your healing, or your abundance, or your peace, and the circumstances don't budge. Because this is where people lose faith. This is where they conclude it's all nonsense. And I don't want you to give up at the exact moment when you're actually making progress. Here's the truth. There's often a delay between speaking and seeing. Not always. Sometimes the storm calms immediately. Jesus demonstrated that. Others have demonstrated that. You might demonstrate it too. Especially as you get better at accessing authentic authority consciousness. But often, there's a gap. A period of time where you've spoken, you've commanded, you've declared, and yet nothing in the visible world seems to have changed. And during that gap, doubt rushes in. It didn't work. I knew it wouldn't work. I'm not spiritual enough. I don't have enough faith. This works for other people, but not for me. I'm just too broken, too damaged, too far gone. Listen to me very carefully. That delay is not evidence of failure. It's evidence that your consciousness is being trained. It's evidence that you're building a muscle that's been atrophied from years of disuse. Think about physical exercise. The first time you try to do a push-up, if you've never exercised before, you might not even be able to do one. Or you do one, and your arms shake and you collapse and it feels impossible. And if you judge the effectiveness of exercise based on that first attempt, you'd conclude it doesn't work. I tried to do a push-up and I couldn't. Therefore, physical training is a myth. But that's ridiculous. You know that's ridiculous. You know that if you keep trying, if you do what you can do today, and then tomorrow you try again, within weeks you'll be stronger. Within months you'll be doing push-ups easily. Not because the law of physical training suddenly started working, but because you built the capacity to work with that law. Your spiritual muscles work exactly the same way. The first time you try to speak to your storm from authority consciousness, you might only access that feeling for 2 seconds. The rest of the time you're in fear, in doubt, in desperation, and that's okay. That's not failure, that's the beginning of strength. You speak again the next day. Maybe this time you access authority consciousness for 5 seconds. Then doubt rushes in, but you don't let it stop you. You speak again, and again. And slowly, gradually, the authority consciousness gets stronger. The certainty becomes easier to access. The faith becomes more stable. You're not trying to make something happen. You're training yourself to sustain a consciousness that allows things to happen. And here's what you need to know. Every time you speak to your storm from even partial authority, even shaky faith, even doubt, tinged certainty, you're making an impression on your subconscious mind. You're carving a groove, creating a pathway, establishing a pattern. And eventually, that pathway becomes the dominant one. Eventually, authority becomes your default response to storms, instead of fear. Eventually, you speak and you know, not hope, that reality will respond. So if you've been trying this and it hasn't worked yet, don't give up. You're not doing it wrong. You're just in training. The delay is not rejection, it's repetition. It's the universe or God, or infinite intelligence, or whatever name you prefer for the creative power that runs reality helping you build unshakable authority. There's another reason for delay that I need to mention, and this one is harder to accept but equally important. Sometimes the storm doesn't come immediately because there's something you need to learn from it first. Some wisdom you need to extract. Some strength you need to develop. Some old belief or pattern you need to release before the new reality can stabilize. God is not punishing you. Life is not testing you. But consciousness is precise. If your subconscious mind is carrying beliefs that contradict what you're declaring, those beliefs have to be addressed. If you're speaking, I am abundant, but deep down, you believe money is evil, or rich people are greedy, or I don't deserve to be comfortable, those conflicting beliefs will sabotage your creation. The delay, then, becomes an opportunity, an invitation to go deeper, to ask yourself, what do I really believe about this? What am I afraid will happen if this problem actually resolves? What part of my identity is wrapped up in being the person who struggles? Because sometimes, unconsciously, we're attached to our storms. They've become part of who we are. They give us an identity, a story, a reason for why life is hard, and letting go of the storm means letting go of that identity. This is deep work. This is the work of becoming conscious of your own unconsciousness. And you can't skip it. You can't bypass it with affirmations and positive thinking. You have to be willing to look at the ways you've been complicit in creating and maintaining your own storms. Not to blame yourself, not to feel guilty, but to take responsibility, to see clearly, so you can choose differently. And when you do that work, when you bring those unconscious beliefs into the light, and consciously choose to release them,